Captain Edward Harrington, a decorated British officer with a solemn gaze and a past full of valor, returned home from the war front in 1943. As he stepped through the doors of St. Mary's convalescent home, the echoes of war still reverberated in his mind. The loss of his right arm and the scars that crisscrossed his body were stark reminders of his sacrifice. The once vibrant officer now faced a future filled with uncertainty and a physical reminder of his suffering. Amidst the antiseptic smell of the hospital and the monotonous routine of convalescence, Edward met nurse Margaret Tanner. She wasn't the typical image of a wartime heroine. Her beauty was understated, with a rounder figure, blonde hair, striking blue eyes, and freckles that danced across her cheeks. She approached Edward with an air of empathy, her gentle touch offering more than just medical care, but also companionship that Edward desperately craved in his vulnerable state. Margaret was cunning, with a sharp mind hidden behind her disarming smile. She quickly learned of Edward's impending inheritance, a vast estate, a family fortune, and titles that carried weight in society. She saw an opportunity, and with a calculated plan, she began to weave her web around the unsuspecting officer. Her visits to his room increased, each time leaving him more smitten than before. She listened intently to his stories, laughed at his jokes, and feigned admiration for his bravery. Edward, blind to her ulterior motives, began to fall in love, his heart yearning for the comfort and future she promised. Their romance blossomed, with Edward proposing to Margaret in the garden of St. Mary's under the autumn leaves, believing that she was his savior in a world that had taken so much from him. The wedding was swift, with Margaret insisting they marry before Edward was discharged and returned to his family estate. Once they arrived at Harrington Hall, Margaret's demeanor shifted. She took charge with a confidence that surprised Edward, quickly ingratiating herself with the household staff and managing the estate's affairs. Over time, Edward grew more isolated, his health and spirits declining as Margaret's influence expanded. It wasn't long before whispers began to circulate about Margaret's true intentions. A private detective, hired by Edward's concerned cousin, uncovered a trail leading to a dark past. Margaret was already married to a notorious conman, a man with a criminal history who had orchestrated similar schemes before. The revelation shattered Edward, but before he could confront her, Margaret vanished. Witnesses last saw her at the docks, boarding a ship bound for the Americas, accompanied by her elusive husband. Reports soon followed of a violent storm that had swept through the Atlantic, leaving destruction in its wake. The ship Margaret was rumored to be on was among those lost at sea, with no survivors reported. The news brought an ironic sense of closure to Edward, who found solace in the knowledge that nature had dealt its own form of justice. As he looked out over the sprawling grounds of his ancestral home, Edward resolved to rebuild his life, grateful for the lesson learned and the second chance fate had afforded him. By Squirrel Sandwich.